Hello and welcome back to Speculative Presents. I'm your host, Speculative Dude. Now it's time to get back into the swing of reviewing some racing movies, and today I've brought us back to America for a look at Born to Race. Now, this movie is actually pretty good. They hit a lot of points. I only have a couple of minor complaints about it, and I'll point those out when I get to them. Generally speaking, it's actually a really good movie. I'm not going to say it's going to be a movie that's going to interest a ton of people, but honestly, I bought it. And, I got it in the. I happened to see it at Walmart in the in the little cheap DVD bin and picked it up just out of interest. And it didn't disappoint. I'll definitely say that, considering I'd never heard of it before. Went into it completely unknown, and hey, it was actually pretty good. So what's the main point? We have our main character, Danny. Now, Danny he's a young kid. He's just about to start his senior year in high school. He's a street racer. He built up. He's got the car you'll see mostly throughout the movie is a 2004 WRX STI. Great car. I got an 03 myself. So I'm very familiar with the platform. So they're great cars. Well known in the tuning community. But as you see early on, Danny's reputation, and even though they don't say it, you guess he must have gone to some legitimate competitions as well and done pretty well there, because he's earned himself a sponsorship. And in that high-profile sponsorship, they've also given him a... Now, this movie came out in 2010, I would be assuming it was a brand new 2010 brand new WRX STI. It's got all the trimmings. It's got all those sponsors, decals, and all that stuff. It's obvious that this is supposed to be a promotional car. Well, as a lot of racers tend to do, he goes back to see the street racing where he came up. And unfortunately, it reveals a problem that Danny has in the movie, and that's that people tend to goad him into racing, whether he wants to or not. He lets one of his friends, Mikey, makes a reference to, "You're like a bull whenever somebody waves a flag in front of you." He goes there. He doesn't actually have the intention of racing, but one of his former rivals goads him into racing by, saying, you show up with a, show car, and you're just here to show off. So, of course he races, and before the race starts, you hear on the radio that the police have been called. I should say this is located. While they don't say where, it's Southern California somewhere. It's the indication that it's Los Angeles, but it's never directly said. So the police have been called. And Mikey tries to tell him, "Don't do it, don't do it. The police are on the way. You don't want to. You're going to get in trouble." And he ignores him. He waves him off. He's like, "Just flag the race. It'll be over in 10 seconds." So, begrudgingly, Mikey calls the race. Lays the flag, and sure enough, at the end of the race, he ends up crashing into a police car. The police car just happens to show up right by the finish line. He slams right into him. Gets arrested, gets his sponsorship stripped. Loses that, and his mother has to pick him up at the police station. Apparently, this has become a problem for Danny. His mom gives a little bit of explanation dialogue that she only was letting him race because she thought it would keep him out of trouble, and obviously that's not working. So she sends him to live with his estranged father, who hasn't seen in I believe they say 6 years, or it might be 8 years, but his father's a recovering alcoholic. Now, you learn this throughout the movie, but you find out that his dad was a professional racer who made a bad pass, wrecked his leg and couldn't keep racing, and basically turned to alcohol. And it pretty much tore their family apart. So, he goes to live with his dad, who's now recovered. His dad has his own shop, but it's out, kind of out, even though it's still California, it's out in this little small town. Now, one thing I will say is that depending on how you look at it, it's never said exactly how small this town is, because when the town is shown, it almost kind of looks like a, one road in, one road out town. It just goes down, and you got your main street, one of those towns that's probably going to have, maybe 100 people living in it or less. However, when they show Danny going to his new high school, it seems like a relatively normal-sized high school for a city. So, like I said, it's they did a trick. There's a little joke about, I live in Omaha, Nebraska, and there's a little joke about how Omaha is portrayed in movies, and it's portrayed the same way, even though we have a population of almost 500,000 people. That it's shown as, and I get the feeling that that's kind of what they did with this town. They showed the little section of the town that was kind of looks, a little burbish, and then, however, in reality, it's actually just a small section of a much, bigger town. So, like I said, Danny goes to school. He's got, he's got to meet everybody. It's the typical new kid approach. And it's not helped by the fact that most of the young people in this town, now this town actually, like I said, despite being a very small town, supposedly, actually has a very strong car culture in it. Maybe not the same as in like LA or some of the bigger cities where they get together and right, but there are races, and it's they may not have as many people, but the people there obviously love it, and there's a big family in town, the rich, it's kind of the stereotype of the rich, the new guy coming into town and taking on the rich. It's almost like a Western, takes on the rich, conglomerate guy. Danny's dad has this little garage, works out by himself, and people like and respect him, but he's not making a lot of money doing it, versus, I believe it's Kendall Performance over here is big, huge, well-known, tons of service shops, that kind of thing. Like I said, very much a modern-day Western in that respect, of the new guy coming into town and taking on the... But being kids, it's... like I said, most of the kids in this town are, muscle car people, muscle car guys. And obviously anybody who knows anything about cars and the car scene knows there's a huge rivalry between muscles and imports. Specifically American and Japanese. Not that European doesn't come into that rivalry somewhat, but for some reason it's mostly American and Japanese that tend to be rivals. I've never really understood it myself, considering if you're modifying your car, you're doing the same things. So, I mean, if you're talking just baseline vehicles, maybe you could compare, but when you're really out there strongly modifying your cars, hey, we're all doing the same things. I've had muscle cars, I've had imports. So, I've liked both, and I've hated both. So, but it pretty much you set up the rivalry of, like I said, most people around like the muscle cars, especially young Mr. Kendall. Can't think of his first name, but his dad's obviously the performance parts shop guy. He's got a brand new Mustang GT, which most people, even if it's not your favorite muscle car, most people just recognize that as one of the most symbolic muscle cars. You instantly think muscle car when you hear Mustang. And versus Danny's STI, a WRX STI. And that pretty much sets up some of their rivalry immediately. He goes to town. Young Kendall is there in school, and he and his friends are just kind of horsing around. It's one of those typical things of I'm rich, therefore I don't give a crap. Which I'm not really the biggest fan of, but the actor in the specials behind the scenes footage. The actor talked about, being allowed to play that, and he had asked the director, he's like, can I play with this a little bit? So, because he wanted to have fun, I guess apparently initially his character was rather stiff, and he wanted to have a little bit more fun with the character, so he ends up coming off as a little bit goofy sometimes, but it doesn't really change his character's attitude of, he's got a superiority complex, You know, he thinks he's the best. You know, and most of the time he's willing to prove it, and most of the time he does. So it's not like he's just ego. He does have skill to back it up. Now, of course, there's, as per, you know, any, you know, teenage movie, you have to have a love interest, and of course it just so happens that Danny, you know, meets and, you know, falls for, you know, young Mr. Kendall's ex, you know, and he, you know, it's almost like the Karate Kid bit when the bullies, you know, from the Cobra Kai are looking out over the beach, and one of them says, "Hey, I thought they broke up," and the other guy says, "Yeah, she did, he didn't." And in a way, it's kind of the same way with these. She makes a comment about they went out twice, and all he did was ever talk about his car, so that's, you know, she didn't really care. She didn't think he cared about her at all. But of course, to him, being, you know, kind of the stereotype dumb jock, that meant, you know, oh, you know, we're going out, and, you know, you better keep your hands off her. You know, so of course they get into, you know, a fight. In fact, she throws a to make Danny actually feel welcome. She's throwing a back to school party and invites him as the new guy, since he's new in town, he doesn't know anybody. She just, you know, hey, come on over, we're having a party. You know, which actually I think casts her in a really nice light. In contrast to like one of her friends who comes off as kind of bitchy, and, you know, I was like, oh, it's a new guy. You know, she's actually, despite the fact that her character's obviously well off, she's actually a very nice, genuine character. And so, you know, he runs into a couple of other kids in town who own, who like imports. One of them played by Spencer Breslin. Like I said, on the first day, on their way to school, the first day, they get skunked by Kendall and his Mustang. You know, trying to keep up with him. You know, they can't do it. You know, it's not that their car is bad. It's just, you know, it's just not as good. You know, a lot of times I think a lot of us who tune cars run into that issue, not because the car may be worse, but because you get somebody who has more money and can put more time and effort into the car, whereas, you know, he's got a whole store behind him, and his dad's supporting his racing, versus, you know, these other guys, they got to do it themselves. So, you know, they go to school. Like I said, he becomes friends with, you know, these guys who, even though they're not really comic relief characters, which I was very relieved at, but they're still not. They're still kind of the outcasts, partly because they're, you know, they like imports versus muscle cars. Partly because they're kind of portrayed as a little bit nerdish. You know, they're not the popular guys. You know, and, you know, so they kind of bond with Danny, since he's kind of, you know, the new guy and therefore pushed aside. You know, they all go to the party together, or I said, Danny, you know, and Danny and Kendall get into it. You know, they take off running. Danny, you know, drives off. You know, Kendall chases him in his car, and Danny manages to outrun him. And of course, instantly, that's, you know, in today's, and this also shows that it's not as small a town as it's portrayed. The next day, everybody knows what happened. Everybody knows that Danny outran Kendall. It's like, dude, how did you do that? You know, dude, that's awesome. You know, nobody outruns him. He's the fastest in town. You know, and he's. It's funny because somebody asked him, you know, how does it feel? He says, honestly, he goes, I kind of liked it better when nobody knew who I was, because now all of a sudden, you know, everybody clamors for his attention, and he decides to sign up for the high school. There's an actual official competition, which is high school drag racing, and there are lots of competitions like that around the country. I actually thought it was very nice that there wasn't just illegal racing shown. There's, you know, structured. It's, you know, it's like a subdivision of like NHRA. You know, that's great. Yeah, so you know, he decides to sign up for that, and that way he can prove, you know. He can prove between him and, you know, he didn't feel like, even though, yeah, he outran him, Danny felt like he didn't prove what he wanted to prove, you know. So it just so happens that there's another race, an actual, street gathering race, and he gets goaded into racing Kendall in a drag race again, and he loses. So, this leads to, one, obviously people losing, his popularity goes down the tubes. Not that he really wanted it, but people all of a sudden, it's like, oh, he's not as good as we thought. Kendall decides that he doesn't want, that he doesn't want Danny in the drives because he still, even though he won, he felt the race was too close. So he goes, so he sends one of his dad's, mechanic buddies to go clip the brakes on Danny's car. And as Danny's driving, his brakes go out. It runs out of brake fluid. Doesn't total the car, but messes it up really good. And of course, this is after having an argument with his father. Now, of course, throughout the whole movie, he and his dad have not gotten along. He felt like his dad abandoned him. His dad, of course, feels responsible in many ways. But he's one thing that's also been going on through this thing is Danny also sees that his dad is, a lot of people, especially Kendall, tend to poke fun at his dad because of his past. And, and you realize that Danny is doing the same thing. And not poking fun at him, but he's holding his dad's past over his head. In many ways it's understandable because it affected him so much, but you get to see through the other characters that, some people, don't, even though Danny's dad is trying, he's a recovered alcoholic, he's trying to, make good on his life, some people won't let go of what he's done, the mistakes he's made in the past, especially Kendall and his father, who you find out that, Kendall and his dad were, or Kendall's dad was rivals with Danny's dad, when they were younger, just like, their sons are today. In fact, his dad has a really nice, which you find out that his dad won, the high school drag race back, the official high school drag race back in the 80s with a, now I didn't realize this car came in this color, but I looked online, apparently it does, a cherry red Buick Grand National. And anybody who knows 80s muscle cars and knows that the Grand National was, pretty darn impressive car back in the 80s. So, you have that car here, that his dad used to drive, and there's one point where he pulls it out of the garage and drives Danny to school because Danny's car's not working, and happens to run into Kendall's dad. And they have a drag race in the town. And, of course, Danny's dad wins. He may not be able to professionally race anymore, but he can handle an old muscle car on a straight road. So, that's pretty good to show that his dad, and throughout the movie you also see that his dad, knows his cars very well. And Danny has kind of, again, because his dad kind of pushed him away, Danny feels that he kind of has this snobbish attitude towards his dad that I know more than you, I'm better than you because I, never did this. And his dad, yells at him a couple of times just for his general attitude, which is understandable. But there's a point where, his dad tells him, well, you're going to work at the shop after school to help me out around here. And he does, and Danny realizes he doesn't know anything about older cars. He even says, I know, programmable ECUs and, I know injectors, I know that is this. I don't know old carbureted, any of this. It's like, so basically Danny knows nothing about older cars. He only knows newer cars. And, so, his dad kind of, but then of course Danny still thinks his dad doesn't know anything about, newer cars, of course. It's like, well, okay, if you know old cars, you don't know new cars. Any real mechanics out there know that to be in business, you have to stay up with technology. And I know the mechanics I go to, they tell me about stuff they have to go back in and learn when a new engine comes out. They got to go back in and learn how it works, what the layouts are, etc. So there's, so Danny's, STI is not working at one point in the race, right after he outran Kendall. something was wrong with the car. They don't say what exactly. But what it is essentially is some of his electronics are knocked loose. So, you know, and Danny can't figure it out. And his dad reaches in and uses the alternator plug and puts that back in, and he says, and he lets him know that because of the way his car's set up, there's so much vibration on there that he's knocking his electronics loose. And he's like, I didn't even think about that. And you know, he points out a couple of couple of issues he might have with the car, and it goes to one thing that you know, the tech talk in this movie is probably the best tech talk I've ever seen in any movie, because there is a little bit of it, not much, but what little there is accurate. He makes a point. He says, you got a 2.5 liter engine in there, right? He says, yeah. He says you're taxing your you just did a turbo upgrade. You're taxing your stock injectors with a large turbo. Well, that's true. You know, you can you know, you're gonna run your engine dry. You're not gonna be. It's gonna be running very lean and not get most performance out of it if you don't have the proper size injectors and fuel pump when you upgrade your turbo on there. And I was like, that's, you know, I was like, wow, that's accurate. And like I said, generally speaking, there's very little tech talk in here, but what little there is good. So, of course, they get to the day of the high school drag race. They have a big montage of how you know, to get Danny's car ready, since the brakes were clipped and, you know, he crashed it. His dad sells his Grand National, and you know, uses the money to buy, you know, and it was funny because Danny's at this point, Danny and his father, of course, finally bonded, you know, over, you know, Danny has the emotional moment of breaking down in front of his dad. It's like, you know, why did you leave? You know, why did you, you know, put us through this? You know, and his dad, you know, shamefully admits that he did it because he couldn't take it. You know, he knew that he was, you know, at that time he was a loser, and he couldn't, and that's why he left it, because he knew he wasn't good for them. Not, you know, maybe not the best explanation, but it's an understandable one. And so he goes, they fix up his car, they take it to the drag races. Sure enough, he ends up winning. In the finals, he beats Kendall. Kendall's car actually blows its engine. The car blows up. They actually Danny saves his life. You know, it's pretty. It's you know, it's kind of a cliched ending, admittedly, but it's not done badly. You know, and like I said, I don't really have a lot. There's most movies I can find something that it's like, okay, that's really stupid, and I can't do that here. There are some things that bother me a little bit. For example, Danny never does, it's never shown that he ever gets over being goaded into racing. You know, it's just that the people who are doing it usually get some comeuppance in the end. You know, for example, the guy at the beginning who goaded him into racing, well, Danny may have crashed into the police car, but he still beat the other guy. You know, Kendall, when he rose, well, Danny beat him at the high school drag races, you know, the official competition. So, you know, unfortunately, like I said, I would have liked to have seen him kind of get over that, but that could be worse. There's enough that goes on that you kind of almost overlook that. In fact, it wasn't until I was sitting down ready to do this review that I realized that that was actually a flaw that they'd left in. And in a way, to leave a character with some flaws is good, because you don't want a perfect character by any means. A perfect character is not entertaining. You know, there's nothing interesting to see. You know, so let's see. There's a few. You know, there's really nothing with the cars that I can say is bad. The school situation seems like a fairly, you know, normal high school situation. The class that's shown the most is the shop class, which of course happens to be headed by a former friend of his father's, of Danny's father. So he's one of the few people who's actually kind of supportive of Danny when he gets to school. You know, it's, generally speaking though, it's just a good solid film. It's not, you know, this was a straight-to-DVD movie. This is not a movie that, you know, if it had been released in theaters, it probably wouldn't have done all that great. But, you know, I don't think it needed to be. I think this is one that if you like cars and you like racing, that you might get a pleasant surprise out of it. Like I said, I certainly did. It's, I'm trying to think if there's any, other real negatives, but I don't believe there really were. At least none that I could think of. I think the characters act very well. The only I might say would be the young lady who was the love interest. Her acting wasn't the best, but then again, she was the youngest member of the cast, and I'm not saying that's an excuse, but it's like she had the least amount of acting experience. I think she did okay. And it was more, honestly, it was more that she just kind of stumbled over the dialogue just a little bit, and it was noticeable at some points. But other than that, like I said, generally speaking, though, like I said, she did good. The whole cast did good. This was, like I said, primarily about drag racing. There was some street racing, but the drag racing that seemed fairly, pretty accurate. Not trying to take away from what I actually like the initial drag racing Fast and Furious, despite some people's hate on it, because even though it takes 2 minutes to do a quarter mile, you get to see the different the different things that go on, and in my opinion, the mindset of a race. Here they do the same thing, but they do it within what would be give or take 10 seconds of the race, and so it just comes off really, really well. I thought I would recommend it. You can find it on Blu-ray, you can find it on DVD, easy enough. Look on Amazon. And, I wouldn't be a bit surprised if it was on Netflix. I don't know, I haven't looked, but I'm sure it's probably there. You find it on eBay, Amazon, wherever. Or you could probably even find it down at your local video store, possibly even that. Like I said, I found mine at Walmart. So, that's, generally speaking, like I said, overall just really solid. Maybe nothing that's going to thrill you, but I don't think there's anything in there that would massively disappoint you either. Now, my next couple of movies, I'll actually be doing a kind of little tonal shift from movies that have been, honestly, more dramatic. The last couple have been more dramatic, to movies that are a little simpler. The next two that I'll be doing are from Japan again. One is titled Drift Z, and the other is Drift Beauty's Battle. Both of them a little bit cheesier, not the same quality that you're going to see in pretty much anything that I've reviewed now, mostly due to clearly, obviously, not particularly large budgets. But, generally speaking, they're fun to watch, though. So, we'll see what happens next, and, hopefully you like this. I'm having, unfortunately, to leave out a few movies, not because they're bad or anything like that, but I'm just kind of running low on time lately. So I'll be doing these two, and then maybe one or two more, and then finally I'll be showing what I have, in my opinion, is the worst racing movie ever made, on a personal level. So, we'll see what happens. Hopefully you guys can enjoy it. If there's any racing movie that you guys want me to look at, let me know, by all means, and I'll take a look at it and see if it's worth reviewing. Maybe I'll keep this series going even longer. But until then, that's my opinion. Take it for what it's worth. Speculative Dude, out.
4, 3, 2, 1.